Good morning everybody, welcome back to class. Today we're going to talk about some things that have been recommended by students at school. Last night I didn't have a great deal of time because my wife's off sick after contracting intestinal parasites from a dodgy papaya salad. For once, the smell coming from the toilet is not my fault. She's punching me down here. So I was given a few recommendations by some of the students about different things they wanted me to talk about and explain. And one of the most interesting ones I found was shifting. I'm not going to mention who said it, but thanks Molya for that one. Now I'm not quite sure what she meant by shifting because there's two ways of looking at it. One could be changing from one form to another, shape-shifting from a human to a different kind of form. The most common form of that would be lycanthropy or becoming a werewolf. That's probably, in terms of literature, the most common output for that kind of thing. So I looked into it, I looked through the various different things to find out if there was any scientific evidence or any real basis that this was actually real. And this is what I found. No. And then I thought, that's a bit of a narrow-minded attitude, so I looked further to try and find if there was anything that was more believable, more down to earth, or something maybe we hadn't thought of. For instance, a man turning into a woman, or becoming a different age, so that your body physically changed in small but subtle ways. And this is what I found. No. If you look up shapeshifting on the internet, you don't find very much in terms of historical facts. There's lots of folklore, there's lots of speculative fiction, there's lots of stories about people or animals changing into different forms, but there really is very, very little solid actual evidence. The most common myths and folklores usually involve werewolves and vampires. Werewolves, as you know, turn a human being into a wolf or a wolf man. Vampires have the ability to turn into a bat. In classic literature from the Romans and the Greek, we have the story of Odysseus. In that story, the men in Homer's Odyssey are turned into pigs. Eventually, they're turned back. This is probably the oldest example in classical literature of people being turned into animals in a story. There was many others. The gods themselves would change fairly regularly. Zeus was transformed into a wolf many times, various different birds, as well as into other people. In British and Irish legends, fairies, witches and wizards are all noted for their ability to change into other forms. Not all fairies are able to shapeshift. Some are limited to changing their size, but most could change into other animals by using glamour to create illusions. You've all heard the story of witches turning themselves into their familiars, such as black cats, but they're also famously able to turn themselves into rabbits or hares. Norse mythology is also full of the ideas of their gods turning themselves into other forms. Odin and Loki are common examples of this. Even in the Avengers movie, we see Thor turning his hammer into the shape of an umbrella. Because this is common throughout the Norse stories, where they would hide themselves, their weapons and their equipment, by turning them into other things. In Indian legend, there are some examples of people being turned into animals. I'm not making this up, by the way. In the Indian fable The Dog Bride, a buffalo herder falls in love with a dog that has the power to turn itself into a woman when she bathes. I've been to India, that can't have happened very often. In Chinese mythology, there's a long-running legend of the, I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, Huli Jing, which is a fox spirit which usually appears as a beautiful young woman who is dangerous. She's often used as the heroine in love stories. In one such legend, a snake falls in love with a man, and the story recounts the trials that she and her husband faced. There's a similar one running through Japanese mythology, the yokai, with the ability to shapeshift into, again, a fox. So there are many stories running through many different cultures about people or animals changing from one form into another. In most of these cases, something's required to form the shift, some kind of magic or some kind of talisman that creates an ability for one person to shift into other things. But not always. Some creatures are given this ability and they can turn into other things. But there is no evidence, and there never has been any scientific evidence to suggest that this is actually true. One of the most famous modern occurrences is on a place called Skinwalker Ranch. Skinwalker Ranch, also known as Sherman Ranch, is a property located about 500 acres southwest of Ballard, Utah in America. And it's the site of a lot of paranormal and UFO-related activities. The name is taken from the Skinwalker of the Navajo, a legend about vengeful shaman who can shift their skin into the form of other creatures. Now, in this place, UFO sightings were extremely common from the 1970s onwards. Claims from the ranch appeared in 1996 in Salt Lake City in the Desert News that there have been things floating in the sky, unexplained objects flying around, people seeing gigantic wolves, all kinds of very strange and surreal activities started going on. A book by Colin Kelleher suggested that they had seen many anecdotal sightings of UFOs and Bigfoot-like creatures, crop circles, glowing orbs, and poltergeist activities such as things flying around with nobody touching them. Cattle mutilations were also fairly common, with animals being torn apart or moved in broad daylight from one place to another in ways that couldn't have happened, jumping from one place to another where there were fences in between in seconds where it would have taken days. Sadly, while these stories are interesting, fun and entertaining, they're rarely anything more than that. I certainly don't want to discount them because there's never been any interesting studies done into the idea of human beings shifting into other forms. With what we know now of quantum physics and the way the universe is structured, it's not impossible for somebody to create a new reality for themselves which could shape their entire form. We believe it's possible, and it could be that we've lost the ability or the understanding of how that works. Certainly we should never discount any possibilities in the modern age. Science is starting to catch up to the idea that what used to be magic could just be nature. Sadly, there really is no evidence that any of these things actually existed for now. Hopefully our understanding of the universe will expand, and that might change. This is the wrong video. The other thing that it could have meant by shifting was shifting from one universe to another. Now this is part of the idea that the universe isn't just one universe but a multiverse. Various layers of universe on top of universe separated by something, but maybe something that isn't very strong. We see this talked about a lot in literature because it's becoming mainstream in science now. The idea of a series of infinite universes stretching out into infinity is becoming quite a common theory. The idea is that there are infinite number of multiple universes, all exactly the same as each other, except for a few minor details. So every choice you make branches off into a whole new universe. Another theory is that every time we travel through time, it branches off into a new universe. I mean, most of these theories, the idea holds true that that one person crosses many universes, so that your idea of reality is that you cross infinite number of these infinite universes. Now that means that we cross universes all the time, which means our realities are flexible, and we see things like the Mandela effect. An interesting piece of evidence for the idea of the multiverse and the idea that there are multiple universes that we can slide from is the Mandela effect. Now, the Mandela effect is the idea that Nelson Mandela, a famous figure from South Africa, a terrorist who was locked up for many years and was then later released after the turn of the century, died in 1984. Now, nobody's saying that this was a conspiracy or that he was he was covered up and was replaced by an actor. No one's saying that, but people remember distinctly his funeral around 1984. Lots of people remember it being televised, it being a huge event in South Africa. Lots of people watched it on the television, and all of them tend to describe very, very similar circumstances. But the fact is, he didn't die in 1984. The fact is, he died much, much later on. And this is where we get the idea of the Mandela effect from. There are lots of other very famous examples where people believe that they're living in an alternate reality, where people believe that they've woken up and the universe that they now live in is no longer the universe that they remember. Another common one is New Zealand. A lot of people remember it moving on the map. They remember it being in one place, and now it's in a completely different place that's unfamiliar to them. Is this possible? Well, physically, no. But is it possible to shift into a universe where the rules are slightly different? That's much more difficult to refute. The Mandela effect is also known as false memory syndrome. This is because the human brain doesn't really remember things very reliably. Ask any policeman or detective that and they'll assure you that eyewitness statements and eyewitness testimony is almost useless. If we have a number of people all seeing the same event, especially if it's an emotionally charged event, all of them are likely to describe it differently, remembering the people involved in different ways, different clothing, different heights and builds, depending on their personal biases. Eyewitness statements are usually very, very difficult to use because they never match up, and they very, very seldom match up to the evidence on a scene. So people don't remember things correctly. Great example of that would be the Bernstein Bears. Now that's a children's book from America, but it's widely known. I've seen it in bookshops around Cambodia. Now the Bernstein Bears has always been remembered and talked about that way, but if you look at the book, it's actually the Berenstain Bears, and apparently according to the publishers, it always has been. Now, is this just a case of people reading it wrong or simply remembering it wrong, or a group of children in schools being read it the wrong way by lazy teachers who couldn't be bothered to read the title correctly? We don't know, but the most likely cause of all this is someone just not doing their job properly, not reading it properly, and not remembering it properly. And that's very, very human, and that's where we get most of the Mandela effect things from, but not all of them. One of the most interesting stories about the multiverse, or the possibility of bleeding from one universe into another, is the Taured mystery. The Taured mystery, or the Man from Taured, is a popular story regarding an event where an unknown man from a different world landed at a Japanese airport and then later vanished. The incident is said to have occurred during the 1950s and is one of the most popular examples of time travel or parallel world that's yet been recorded. According to the story, a man landed at Haneda Airport, also known as Tokyo International Airport, during the July month in the year 1954. The man belonged to a Caucasian race and had a beard. When his passport was checked by immigration at the airport, he noticed a strange thing. The passport belonged to a country named Taured, which did not exist. When he was inquired about the same, he confidently claimed that he was from Taured, a country situated between France and Spain. He even showed the location of his country to immigration officers on a map. While showing his country, Taured, he pointed towards the area covered by the European nation of Andorra, and was shocked to not find his country on the map. Arguments followed between the officers and the man, with both sides refusing to give in. Eventually, the officers arrested the man, suspecting that he may be a criminal. They detained him in a nearby hotel and seized all his documents. He was placed under security so that he could not escape. The next day, when officers reached his room, they were surprised. He had vanished from the room and there was no signs of escape. The officers outside guarding the room could not believe their eyes. Even his personal documents, which were taken by the officers, also disappeared right along with him. Another story is the Philadelphia experiment. In World War II, the Americans experimented with radar invisibility. They used Einstein's unified wave theory to refit a ship, the USS Eldridge, with special technology to make it invisible. Not just invisible to radars, they wanted it invisible to the naked eye. The legend says that they fitted it out with degaussing motors, big electric motors, which created an electromagnetic field. When they activated the machinery, the ship did indeed disappear. Many of the crew had disappeared. The ones that remained were completely insane. Several of them had melted through the decks of the ship, limbs being locked in the metal plating. Some were on fire. Some were convinced that they were talking to people who weren't there. Many of them said they'd been to another universe and they'd seen things that were terrible. Some reported UFOs. Some reported they'd been missing for days. So if we do live in a multi-layered universe, where everything that you can imagine is played out in some other way, what would that mean to the way we live our lives? Now, many scientists and physicists do believe that this is possible, or in fact probable. If we live in a multiverse where every single universe is somewhere out there in infinite ways, then there are infinite numbers of you living infinite lives. There's a universe where men are women. There's a universe where women are horses. There's a universe where we're all Batman. All of these things are not just out there somewhere, but they're out there infinitely. There are infinite universes out there, which means there are infinite universes in which we are all Batman. Now, as ridiculous as that sounds, that's what the physics and that's what quantum reality suggests is actually possible or likely at the moment. Whether we can travel between them, we don't know. So is shifting real? Is shifting possible? Shifting between universes is probably very real, it's probably possible, and it's probably something that we all do every day. It's probable that the layers of the universe are laid out in such a way that we cross them and we cross into other universes all the time, but the universes are so similar that we barely notice, and when we do notice, it's usually where we get the idea of déjà vu from. Is it possible to change into a wolf? Probably not. At least not for us. At least not for us yet.